is a literary style in the Gospel of Mark that I mentioned on Sunday a few weeks ago, known as a Markan sandwich. And the idea is that just like a sandwich which contains 2 pieces of bread and a filling, so too the narrative of Mark can be described as 2 pieces of bread with a filling. Let me explain. On Monday, we read about Jairus' daughter who was lying in bed dying. As Jesus was on his way, we saw on Wednesday that he was interrupted by a woman who was bleeding who had touched his cloak. And so Jesus stops and interacts with that woman. Today we return back to Jesus' journey to see Jairus' daughter. Okay, so if you think about this summary as a sandwich, what we can say is that the discussion between Jesus and Jairus is the first piece of bread. The return of Jesus to his journey to heal Jairus' daughter is the second piece of bread. Jesus' interaction with the bleeding woman is the filling. Okay, now, why is this important? Well, because the theory is that the filling in between the bread is the main point of the whole narrative. Okay, so if we think about this narrative as a sandwich, we'll focus on the last piece of bread and then return to what the theory says is the main point. Okay, so Mark 5 verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Now, there are some people who blame Jesus for the daughter's death by allowing himself to get distracted. But the reality is that there would be some distance between Jesus and Jairus' house, and the fact that the men had already left to inform Jairus meant that she may well have died while Jairus himself was on the way to see Jesus. We don't know, but the sadness is that it's too late. Okay, she has died. Mark 5 verse 36. Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, don't be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. And we skip to verse 41. Jesus took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. You know, I love how Mark writes this because Jesus has just raised a little girl from the dead. You know, he's healed people of illness, he's cast out demons, and he's demonstrated his power over nature. But never before has he raised someone back to life. And Mark simply says, Jesus takes the girl by the hand, speaks to her, and immediately the girl stood up and walked around. Oh, and by the way, she was 12 years old. The girl's parents and the disciples are astonished by what they've just seen. But Jesus almost nonchalantly says, give the girl something to eat. It seems almost effortless. But Jesus has just raised someone from the dead, which means that he has the power over death. Now, if we return to the idea of the Markan sandwich, what we see in this narrative is an example of faith that is shown by Jairus, who believes that Jesus can heal his daughter of illness. Okay, Jesus does much more than that because he restores her back to life. But the narrative of Jairus and his daughter is the bread. That's either side of the bread. The filling is the woman who is bleeding, and Jesus' words to her, which are Mark 5 verse 34, daughter, your faith has healed you, go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Okay, the point is that faith in Jesus frees us from the suffering of sin. Okay, Jesus will die for our sins and rise from the dead to show us that death has been defeated and that sin has been judged, and because of him we will have peace with God, just as the woman does, just as Jairus and his daughter do. And so friends, with that in mind, why don't you take a minute to pray and thank God for Jesus' sacrificial death, and then spend another minute in prayer asking God to give the gift of faith to those you know who don't yet trust in Jesus.